Welcome back. It is Jeff Santos Show, 34 minutes past the hour. It is time for us to go out west to a city that deserves an NHL hockey team and an NBA team, too. It is the great city of Seattle, Washington, that the city is known for. Nirvana and Pearl Jam. And you can hear our next guest. He's a regular contributor here every Tuesday on the Jeff Santos Show. He's not only a musician, which is what you're hearing, and he's a great journalist. Catch him the Capitol Hill Times in Seattle, Daily Kos, and, of course, always on Twitter. He's on our Twitter at Jeff Santos Show quite a bit. Our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield joins us from the city that is gray today and in that time of the year where a lot of the beautiful people go underground. Happy Tuesday.
Well,
Mr. Mark?
The Trump administration is any indication, people might be going underground for other reasons.
Yes, indeed.
But yeah, it's actually sunny in Seattle today, but don't tell anybody. You know, that's my usual response to that. But yeah, it's been very cloudy and wet, and yeah, it's hibernation time. People are like bears here. They just start sleeping a lot and not going out quite as often. Not because there's, 8 feet of snow, but just because it's so wet and rainy and gray a lot of the time. But I should tell you, though, we did have a great celebration the other day. There's a very famous rock club here in Seattle. It was called the Off Ramp for years and years. And Jimi Hendrix played there, and Janis Joplin played there, and all the grunge bands played there. It's now called El Corazon. But my band, the Galaxy Machine, has had a studio there for years, and we just moved to another location. So we had a going-away party with lots of loud music and, typical Seattle rock and roll kind of style going-away party. So I just wanted to give a shout-out to the people who run that club and all the artists that have lived there and rehearsed there and done their thing, because it's a major part of Seattle rock history. In fact, I did run into some kids from Kansas a couple of years ago who were literally kissing the walls of the building, because that's where, Nirvana had played, and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. And I met, actually, David Johansen and the New York Dolls there and got to hang out with them. So it's a great... Yeah, when you have a studio in a rock club, it's always a great opportunity to meet some of your heroes. So that was really a great experience for me. And anyway, yeah, so
good stuff.
Music is still going strong in Seattle.
Well, I tell you, it's a great city. It's a great city, Mark, for artists. And, we're going to get into the Trump picks and what happened on Sunday with some good news at Standing Rock. But I want to get your thoughts as somebody who is already surrounded. You're an artist yourself as a musician and as a writer, of the tragedy in Oakland. Yesterday we spoke to the president of the Massachusetts Professional Firefighters, Mr. McKinnon, and talked about the real tragedy in Oakland. Some 36 people died, and there was, of course, a major fire here in Cambridge. Thankfully, luckily, no one was either seriously injured or was killed. But I think it's really important, and we had here in New England, back in Warwick, Rhode Island, a rock concert venue, I think with the band Great White, a hard rock, heavy metal band from the 80s, which a number of people perished, and led to a lot in the Northeast here of strict policies of not only, those who were dealing with the issue of sprinkler systems, but, how many doors to get out and so forth. I know that this is something that's close to your heart, because there are a lot of buildings that you play in, and a lot of your friends who are in the art community that look at abandoned warehouses as places to perform, to practice, to be in clubs. But there obviously need to be a lot more standards here. Your thoughts about what happened in Oakland over the weekend?
Well, it is a great tragedy, and I do have a friend here who lost a couple of his friends in that building. So he was talking to us about it on Sunday and really stressing the need for fire safety measures I don't have any recollection of things happening like that in Seattle. I do remember reading about what happened in Boston. That's, been a legendary story for a long time. And that, I believe, involved fireworks, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was part of the band's, set. Basically, they would do this. I don't know if they did it every time they played, but it's that 1980s. Everything's sparkling up and so on and so forth. But you can't do it in every building. That is not conducive. It's one thing to do it in a sports arena where you have all the latest abilities, not only people to get out the door, as these are relatively new buildings. The one in Warwick, Rhode Island, which we're talking about, was, again, antiquated, and again, what happened in Oakland also. So I think people who are playing, because there's not a lot of money, obviously, when you're in small concert venues or are just trying to find a place to live, as some people were actually living in that warehouse in Oakland. You got to be very careful, I guess. That's my view.
We actually in Seattle have a tradition here of fire dancing, which is very popular. So there is always a lot of safety measures that go along with that. There's always a spotter with a bucket of water and a fire extinguisher at any kind of event where that happens here. So people are pretty careful. A lot of times the fire dancers will actually go outside the building too sometimes, and just do it in the street or something, so people get out of the building to see it. But yeah, it's something that everybody that's played clubs, and I know my band played another famed club here, the King Cat Theater, where Nirvana also got its start here in Seattle. Although they're from Aberdeen originally, and played a lot in Olympia. They actually did some shows at the King Cat Theater, and we did have some of those multimedia kinds of shows where we had all sorts of different kinds of art and fire dancers and things. And people are very, very careful here. A lot of times fire marshals will show up before shows to make sure everything is okay and no fire codes are being violated. So people are pretty careful here in Seattle about that kind of thing, I'm glad to say.
That is good to hear. All right. Well, you have been talking about and writing about, and you've been in contact with your folks at Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, who got arrested there, about what happened in Standing Rock. And I know this is an issue that is very concerned, and it was a huge victory. We don't know what happens in the future, but talk to me about that and what people that you have been in contact with that have been up in the Dakotas, have been protesting, and to the journalists that were there before all the mainstream media got there over the last couple of days. Typical. But what are you hearing, and what are they concerned about, and what are their plans over the coming weeks?
Well, I have interviewed a couple of people who just returned from Standing Rock on Sunday. I did an interview with someone who just returned and is planning on going back on the 20th, Jeff. So I don't think that people's fears that this movement is just going to end are grounded in reality. I think what's happening, and you even saw some interviews with the Young Turks there, where people are saying, yes, we're celebrating, yes, this is a great victory. I think people see it more as a spiritual victory than anything else, because finally the Standing Rock issue got media attention. Finally, CNN showed up, right there at the end. Typical. I have been really shocked at the lack of corporate media presence there. I mean, granted, it's a very isolated area of the country and the weather conditions are harsh, but, we saw them out on the streets during Katrina getting blown down the street while they were reporting, so why people weren't there. But I think that's part of the story, is this lack of corporate media coverage of what's happening. But, there are differing opinions. I know if you go to Sane Progressive, she has a lot to say about people not letting down and not letting this decision by Barack Obama fool them into thinking that somehow this pipeline is going to be stopped. Because obviously this decision will be appealed. We know that. We know that the Dakota Acdcess pipeline folks have pushed, the pipeline project within the 20-mile limit, beyond the 20-mile limit that was set for them already, that they went ahead with this project without the guarantee of this easement and just being very arrogant about being, so confident, their public statements. We are just so confident that we are going to get this easement, Well, in reality, the Army Corps of Engineers is now investigating the possibility of other places where this easement could take place. We're still talking about putting an oil pipeline with potential leakages near major water systems in that part of the country. So I don't think that this is the end of the story. And when you have somebody like Donald Trump coming in who has, $2 million invested in the pipeline, we know that number one is a conflict of interest. Number two, he's already said that he wants the pipeline, and he can overturn this decision. So this is a temporary victory. I think people should celebrate, and they should give credit to each other for doing such a good job of bringing this attention to the media. Unfortunately, having someone's arm almost blown off by a concussion grenade and people being shot in the face with rubber bullets is not the best way to get publicity. And that was not their intention, of course, but that has been the result. And then there was this meeting between the veterans who showed up there. That was a major turn about because all of a sudden there were meetings between the Sheriff's Department and the Army Corps of Engineers and the veterans and tribal leaders. They were actually talking to each other on the bridge. And then the next day, I believe that was Saturday, had a press conference talking about, how the police had agreed to back off from the bridge. However, I have to admit that the Sheriff's Department was still being very sort of overly paranoid about the abilities of violence there. They were spinning some story about how there were elements in the group that were going to try to trigger PTSD in the veterans to get them to become violent, which is all pretty ridiculous. The person that I interviewed on Sunday told me, and this will be a part of my next NPC report. I've been reporting on Standing Rock at YouTube at that program, but he was saying that there was no evidence of violence. He didn't see any weapons. No weapons are allowed in the camp. There was one incident where a man was confronted in a pickup truck who had a rifle. It turned out that he worked for the DAPL, so he was not a protester, and that was very.
He worked for the EPA, you said,
and he worked for the DAPL. He was actually working for the pipeline folks.
Oh my God!
But he showed up with a rifle. He was confronted by a bunch of folks from the tribes who were incredibly brave. They walked right up to him. You can see the video at the Young Turks. He walked right up to this man. Some of those people were tribal law enforcement. They walked right up to the man. They had him surrounded by about a dozen people, and they were able to disarm him peacefully. But then later found out that, yes, the car was registered to the pipeline, the company that owns the pipeline. So, yeah, that was very suspicious. And people were saying then that, well, this may have been an attempt to send in an agitator to try to incite violence so that the police could crack down on these people and get them out of the area. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to arrest or tear gas 6,000 people.
Yep.
Jeff, I doubt that.
And I think especially if a lot of those are also military guys, if I can interrupt you for a second, it takes me back to, what I read about during Vietnam, when a lot of those soldiers, including our current Secretary of State, John Kerry, who of course was a Vietnam vet, protesting and would join these rallies. In fact, I was watching the old Born on the 4th of July movie, where Ron Kovic, true character, true story, portrayed by Tom Cruise in the movie, one of Cruise's better films, when he, in a wheelchair, is being thrown off the wheelchair by police officers and others at the Republican National Convention, this in 1972, and other protests and so forth that were also going on at the time. I really think that that's a huge development and a benefit to those who don't want to see this pipeline go through, to have the military involved, because now you have somebody who can sit down with law enforcement officials, both state and local and federal, that are there, and obviously the folks that are the business leaders, now have to sort of stand up straight in a sense, because these are people that served. And it's very difficult for some of these right-wingers to sort of all of a sudden turn a blind eye on a number of military folks. So that, I think, is a huge development.
I think people also considered it a spiritual victory. I mean, when you interview Native Americans from that area, or you watch some of the live streams that are coming from there, they talk a lot about spirit. That's a major part of Native American culture. And so they were saying that was also a victory for the spirit when some of the veterans literally got down on their hands and knees and apologized to the tribal leaders for the past abuses of the tribes by the U.S. government and the U.S. Army. So that was a turning point. That brought tears to people's eyes and really made a huge difference. There's also this idea that a lot of conservatives, and Trump himself and Pence will point to the veterans, as the people that we need to honor. Well, those veterans are telling you to stop the pipeline, Mr. Trump, so you might want to listen. Number two, during the Occupy Wall Street movement, there were veterans and occasionally active duty members, which I know, could have gotten them in a lot of trouble, who did show up at the camps. Some of them, one man here in Seattle would show up in dress uniform and stand with a sign saying, "I support the people," right? So we also had this recently in Seattle, the night of the election of Donald Trump, when he won the Electoral College, or it was projected to win. There were protests in the streets in Seattle, on Capitol Hill especially, and there was a veteran who came and stood with the protesters in military uniform. So it's not the first time that this happened, and there is a tradition. Also, we should remember, too, that Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard is also a veteran, and she has been wonderful. She has been the only person I know in the United States Congress who has gone there and spoke to people and met with the veterans and become, a direct part of this incident, the series of protests at Standing Rock. So kudos to Tulsi Gabbard. She continually amazes me with her courage. The fact that she resigned from the Democratic National Committee over the Bernie Sanders sabotage plans that they had. I mean, that is amazing that she's willing to go out there and just stand on her own without the support of the rest of the Congress, and not really even with the support of a lot of the Democratic Party, and speak her truth. I think it's very powerful.
No, I give her a lot of credit. I saw that, and I tell you, Mark, one of the other pieces of this is, to me, is important, is that Gabbard has come under criticism recently about her past in Hawaii, her father being homophobic, and other right-wing views. So it's really glad to hear, because I think that she's been a rising star. I've had her on the show a couple of times. Even though I obviously disagree with her father's views, and I guess to a certain extent hers on that issue, I think that what she's done, both with the DNC and here at Standing Rock, not many people outside of Bernie Sanders have stood up in the case against the business establishment in the Dakotas, and, of course, the DNC establishment, which we all know, thanks to our controversial friend there in London, Mr. Assange, that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, had this thing rigged from day one. But speaking of that, I want to ask you, because of the fact now that we are, entering Trump land, it looks like there's a lot of still contention about the 19th with the Electoral College, and there are a couple of people who may switch. But I anticipate that on the 20th of January that Donald Trump will be sworn in as our 45th president of the United States. But I want to know, from what you're hearing on the ground, how many Sanders supporters are going to continue to be engaged from Seattle and across the country, in whatever way, whether it's getting involved locally, which is extremely important, not so much particularly in Seattle, although it's important, I think, in some of the local races. But, there obviously are other parts of the country and places nearby that the Democrats, in my opinion, need to develop a lot more. There are western states, as an example, and, whether we're talking Arizona or Montana or other parts of the West where Democrats have done well in the past, but, can't really seem to get over the top. And I wonder, what your thoughts are and what you're hearing about where the Sanders supporters are going to go, or are they going to sort of, with your friends in Seattle, just veg for a while?
Well, I doubt that, Jeff. There was a big community meeting here on Sunday. It's the second one that's been held since the election as a grassroots effort to bring people together in Seattle to really stand against some of the bigotry and prejudice, that we expect to see coming from the Trump administration. I wrote in the Capitol Hill Times this week in my guest editorial column that Seattle needs to stand strong on this issue. We need to be free Seattle, is the way I described it. We need to be a place where people can walk down the street without fear of reprisal because of their political, religious, ethnic background, color of their skin, sexual orientation. And so we are going to stand strong in Seattle no matter what. And that includes most of the Democrats here, some of whom are actually quite progressive. And, the Washington State Progressive Caucus is amazingly pro-Bernie. We still have a lot of folks, of course, in the Democratic Party who have been around for a long time. So one of the things that the Berniecrats would like to see done, and I've heard this over and over again, I'd really like to see somebody other than Patty Murray or Maria Cantwell representing us in the Congress. We will have Pramila Jayapal, who is much more in the spirit of the Bernie Sanders campaign and this populist progressive movement. But there's also somebody else I should mention who is also a Berniecrat. She...
Live from the palatial studios at Emerson College in beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network. Rebuilding America, together, investing, activism, and supporting the middle class. Now, here's Jeff.
Welcome, it's hour 2 of the Jeff Santos Show, and we are live in Studio A on the campus of Emerson College. It is great to be with you today, folks. We're going to be talking with our good friend Dan Shaughnessy of the Boston Globe on the big Red Sox trade of the day. Mr. Chris Sale from the south side of Chicago, Wayne's not going to be happy, is now a Boston Red Sox, so he's changed his socks from white to red. And, of course, that's a good thing for us Boston folks. Sale is great. A couple of prospects. Well-known prospect, Yoan Moncada, number 1 in Major League Baseball, minor leagues, is going to Chicago, as is Mr. Michael Kopech and a couple of other prospects, and some $30 million to the White Sox for the top pitcher in the American League. And the Red Sox also got help from our guy in Milwaukee, our next guest. We got a relief pitcher named Thornburg. He's going to be there with Kimbrel at the end, the 8th inning guy. Milwaukee Brewers, Travis Shaw going to Milwaukee. And we'll talk with our good friend Dan Shaughnessy at the bottom of the hour. But Robert Craig, Wisconsin Citizen Action, and a great friend of the program, he was here in studio last week, joins us from Milwaukee. Happy End of the World Tuesday to you, Robert.
Good afternoon, Jeff. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, my friend. Good to be with you. We got so much to talk about, and it was so great to have you in studio here last week and to see you. We had a chance to, Robert and I, to go out to dinner, and it was fantastic having you in this great city of Boston the other week, and look forward to making that happen again, Robert. Well, a lot has happened, obviously, with the Trump transition team, and we have a lot of people. Just talk with our good friend and contributor Mark Taylor-Canfield about this briefly, and I want to get into it with you and some of our callers at 772-925-8206, and that is the concern of these appointments. We have Ms. DeVos in education, knows nothing about education. We have, of course, Jeff Sessions, who was one of the first people that he chose, which is really problematic on the issue of civil liberties. You can look at the Treasury pick, on and on. And I wonder now, and I was asking our friend Earl Bender, our contributor, yesterday, about where do Democrats go in terms of opposing these folks, and do they try to stop them, or is it one of these situations try to stop them from becoming Secretary of Education or the Attorney General, or do you try to sort of make sure that whatever kind of legislation they try to impose, that it is stopped as well? So what is the plan from your perspective, Robert?
Yeah, I don't have any information on what the Schumer plan is going to be. But if you would listen to me, I would say that they should hold very rigorous hearings. They should do their research. I mean, obviously the Republicans hold the hearings, but they should cross-examine strongly. And based on the record and based on how they respond to very pointed questions, decide which ones they want to filibuster. But they should filibuster ones that they can win a public argument about, and which are so outrageous. Obviously, they can't do Flynn because he was deliberately appointed to the national security advisor, which doesn't involve confirmation. But Betsy DeVos obviously is someone they should scrutinize very carefully. They have to decide what to do with Dr. Carson. He's totally unqualified to run HUD, other than he started out poor and in a city. But aside from that, he has no comprehension, apparently, of what actual people go through, having left. So I think it's a case-by-case basis, but I think they should certainly choose a couple really egregious ones that they can hold up and which they can win the public argument about and put pressure on Trump and begin to have a debate about this. I mean, they should have a straight-out debate around Betsy DeVos's role in funding and running huge political campaign to make states fund these sleazy fly-by-night voucher schools with public money that are undercutting public education. That's the debate we should be having.
Is it in your mind, as we talk here with our good friend Robert Craig, and we'll take your phone calls in a couple of minutes, that the Democrats should try to, get a Flake from Arizona, get a Susan Collins from Maine, maybe a Grassley from Iowa, some of the moderates that are left in the Republican Party, to kind of go along with them? They right now trail 51-48. That could be 52-48, with the race in Louisiana next week, I believe, that the Republicans are favored to win. Do you think that that's the strategy, or is it that you're not going to be able to stop them there from confirmation, and therefore you just have to muddy it up, delay the confirmations, do as much as you can, similar to what the Republicans did? What is the immediate strategy if they do listen to you, which they should? Listening to Schumer, who I think is a disaster waiting to happen for the Democrats, in my opinion, is not the right strategy. But what do you sense there?
Well, why not have a perpetual filibuster if it's bad enough? Now, that's how things are killed in the Senate. I think that it depends how bad the record is once you put it out and how badly they perform in the confirmation hearing. But you decide then based on that and based on your ability to. And then one problem we're going to have is it's going to be difficult to make one Trump appointment be more controversial than the other. I mean, it becomes normalized, right? That they're all crazy and on the extremes and don't know anything about their subject areas or don't have solid positions. And it could get worse, quite frankly. I mean, David Clark, the cowboy sheriff of Milwaukee County here in Wisconsin, visited Trump Tower last week and is apparently a finalist for Homeland Security Secretary. And this is a man who will probably ride down the Capitol and down the National Mall on a horse with a cowboy hat.
It's a sad state of affairs for sure. Talking with Robert Craig here on the Jeff Santos Show. So you're saying it's kind of an all of the above strategy. However we can stop them, you do it. Whether it's stopping them at the before they get to a confirmation hearing or at the confirmation hearing. I mean, I look back to 1992, and there were 3 attorney general candidates for Mr. Clinton, and finally you ended up with Janet Reno. There was Kimba Wood. Was she the one that had a background as a Playboy hostess and had some issues with her nanny, I believe? And then there was another person had a nanny issue as well. And then of course they went to Reno. So I mean, there's precedent here, for these picks to be changing. And I'm wondering, knowing how slick Donnie is, it's about Slick Willie, Donald Trump, he has Mitt Romney out there, having dinner with him and so forth. I'm wondering if he's thinking about, well, I'm not going to name him to Secretary of State because my staff will go out of their mind, particularly those who are favorites of Giuliani. But maybe he's preparing him in case there are any problems with the Sessions, with the DeVos, that maybe he's the guy that they can bring in a lot of different areas here. I don't know. It's just a wild thought, but because there's enough stuff to go after Sessions on, and to me, if there's one position, that's the one that I would go to the wall on, because this is a guy that, to me, can complicate millions of American lives. If you're a person of color, African Americans with police, if you are involved with the INS, in terms of Latinos, if you are a Muslim, in this country. I mean, this is all stuff, never mind, Planned Parenthood locations for women. There's a whole slew of things that is involved in the Attorney General's office.
Yeah, I think that you're right about it. It's what the office can do on their own. It's a lot more than the Secretary of HUD can do, right? Right. Or the Secretary of Education. Winston Sessions has already not been confirmed as a federal judge. And so there's already a record. And it's also, I think, useful to take on someone who has a bad record on race here and to bring up the ugliness of the Trump campaign and a lot of his supporters. So, and I haven't seen people claim that Jeff Sessions has changed. I haven't seen any great mea culpa he ever made on race that I know of, but he should certainly be asked. But you're absolutely right to say that you can kill someone prior to the confirmation process if the press at their appointment is bad enough. So you start at that stage. And then then if they still go forward with them, you deal with the hearing, et cetera, et cetera. So you take this step by step. But otherwise, if Democrats just lay down, then they're actually signing off on these cabinet officials. And so they can't do that, whether they're able to stop these or not.
Well, that's why I'm really concerned about the Schumer thing, because Schumer and Sessions are colleagues. They may also serve on the Judiciary Committee. So, the fact is, to me, is that this would be a real disaster, because now you have somebody, who is, they're concerned about the alt-right, and all these groups are concerned about the alt-right. Well, who's going to be a better friend to the alt-right than Mr. Sessions? I mean, that's an area where I think, the Democrats should draw a line. I'm not saying that other issues, again, I get a lot of friends, and this show has been brought and sponsored in part by teachers unions. The DeVos thing is very, very important to me. As is the fact that we have a privatizer in transportation, as you mentioned, about what's happening at HUD, and on and on and on. Never mind the Treasury Department. There are a lot of people here to go after. But if there's one that I think that could really be the one to stop, and of course you may have to do this again, because Trump may come back, and try Giuliani on us. We'll talk to our good friend Herb Boyd, who's lived in Harlem all these years, and talk to him about what happened in the 1990s and early 2000s with Rudy Giuliani. When it came to search and frisk, which of course led to de Blasio becoming mayor. So, there's a lot there. I guess the question is that, are progressive groups going to be able to organize and demand that the Senate stop Sessions as their number one goal?
Well, by the time this happens, I mean, really, this happened February, March, April, right? We'll already know what happened with the Affordable Care Act, and so that's going to affect a lot of Democratic calculations. Because it's sort of like early Scott Walker administration in Wisconsin, which is a lot of labor leaders were hoping he wouldn't go after labor, and we're going to find out more and more how far Trump is going to go. But you're seeing on the Affordable Care Act, Ryan is now saying it's a 3-year delay, not a 2-year delay. They'll repeal it on Inauguration Day to be effective in 3 years with no replacement. But now has made this promise, this is Speaker Ryan, that no one will be worse off with their new plan, which is a completely unachievable promise based on their set of policies that any conservative has articulated in the whole Obamacare period. So how that goes down is going to be interesting. You're also seeing this interesting blockage where Trump is proposing a job trader tax on companies that outsource, which I kind of like, but Republicans are already saying they'll kill it. So there's going to be a huge division between Trump and Republicans. I mean, now that he is out there with populist red meat on outsourcing and global trade.
Well, I think it's going to be very interesting, to say the least. All right, let's go to the phones and go to Minneapolis and talk to our good friend John in Minneapolis. John, you're next with Robert Craig on the Jeff Santos Show. Good afternoon, man.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I think I'm still in post-traumatic, stress from the election, and I want to wait until January 21st to really think about, how this all unfolds. So I really don't have much to say, except that I think we need to filibuster and do exactly what they did. I hate to say that because that's not my style. My style is to try to cooperate, but I think with people that are as impossible as the Republican Party as a whole, we just have to, just return what they've done to Obama for, most of his 8 years, and maybe, So that's all I have to say.
All right. Well, no, thank you. Thank you, John. I want to grab your thoughts. Let me take that to another step, Robert. Do you feel that the party and the base of the party is up for a fight, day after day here? Because, this is the hearings will probably start just after the first of the year, the confirmation hearings. From what you're hearing in Washington and around the country, there's seemingly Michael Moore, our good friend from Michigan, great director, of course, is lining up people for, I don't know if it's the same day or the day after, a 1 million person march in Washington, D.C. There seems to be some energy here. Is the movement ready?
There's a lot of energy. It's going to have to gain shape and take shape and focus based on events. And I think that, and there's also energy, that's not just about resistance so far. And there are some people who are concerned that resistance itself will lose every step of the way and therefore will dissipate energy. So I think it's really important to try to figure out how to orchestrate this in a way so that you gain steam and gain momentum. I mean, if you think about the Tea Party didn't win. Obamacare passed, right? But they didn't lose momentum. Now that's partly because they could pump in steroids that is astroturf politics and tons of dark money from right-wing billionaires. But it's going to be very important to pick the fights correctly. Healthcare is going to be one of the first ones. I was in Boston last week. There's a lot of planning around that, but there are a lot of others, and it partly depends what Trump does early, right? And that's why with these, I think there really needs to be, from progressive groups and from Democratic senators and members of Congress, very careful research into each of these appointees and a decision on which fight would play out the best in terms of strategy for putting Trump on the defensive. So there's opposition research is done now. So there's a list of horrible things each person supposedly said or did. I'm not sure those things are really going to captivate activists nor sustain public opinion. You need to think more deeply about what would be outrageous. And the problem is it's a polluted culture now where Trump has done so many things and still been elected and is going to be appointing so many coups that just the usual standard issue outrage doesn't work anymore, right? The kind you get in emails demanding money every day from the Democrats, right? So
yeah,
it's going to be a lot of fluidity here, but it's going to be very important to develop a consistent narrative and to build momentum and to pick the right fights. And I think people want the right fights picked, so there needs to be some leadership here. And obviously, you need to go where the energy is as well. It can't all be planned, right? Some of the spontaneous things that happen are going to be the things we should look at, because that means there's a spark there.
Talking with Robert Craig here on the Jeff Santos Show. The phone number to join us, 772-925-8206. Do you agree with me that some of the voices that that we should see and hear, whether it's
you there, Jeff?
Yeah, can you still hear us? Robert? All right. We had some technical issues there. One of the things that I feel is, I think, really important is to make sure that the Democratic Party has voices from the heartland, from places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, on what an education cut by a Ms. DeVos would do of racial justice. And fighting for those who can't fight for themselves, to me, are critical tenets of the Democratic Party. And not just the last year, but going back to FDR, who gave us Social Security, who probably, if he lived long enough, would probably have given us a similar system in health care. That was later taken up by Lyndon Johnson 20 years after the death of FDR with Medicaid and Medicare in 1965. Roosevelt died in 45. Now, it didn't go far enough, of course. They would have made Medicare for everyone. At that time in the 1960s, I think there were a number of countries coming out of World War II that were doing a lot of that. But big business got in the way. Vietnam War got in the way. The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower, 5 years before we had Medicare, warned the American people about. I hope, and I see President Obama today giving his last speech on foreign policy, I hope that the Democratic Party, particularly those outside of Washington, I would love to hear from the governors. Unfortunately, a lot of them are dependent on Wall Street. And maybe there are some. Or maybe there are some that are going to announce that they're going to run. We had Massachusetts State Senator Wolf on this program, who has entertained some ideas and wants to basically take the Bernie Sanders message going forward. There are rumblings about Anita Turner for governor in Ohio. So there are people who are willing to take the Bernie Sanders message and take it forward. And I, for one, want to get behind that kind of candidacy. I don't want to be just another go along to get along with the business interests who pay campaign dollars for both parties. And the Democrats fight over a social issue of gay rights, all women's rights, but really don't bother when it comes to the economic issues. And that's where Donald Trump has come in. He has built that wedge. And it's said that all Democrats, which is totally untrue, are elitists, are not concerning themselves. Only I concern myself with those who make $30,000. I just laugh because I think of the guy that says, I love the uneducated. This from a guy who brags about his Wharton School of Business background time and time again. Very defensive, are you, Mr. Trump, about your education? But I really think, folks, and I bring this back to the idea of communicating the message. And it is an important one, is sports. And today in Boston, I bring up the Chris Sale thing because this is a big day. It'll be all over the papers tomorrow. It's going to be all over your evening news tonight. It's all over the internet as we speak. On talk radio, of course. Sports talk radio. But I really believe that if we take this idea that we're super focused on only policy and we can't communicate that message, which still, by the way, it's not just a communication. I mean, Sherrod Brown was on this show talking about the economic message. You got to sharpen it. Well, it's not just about, having the fundamental communication skills, which Hillary Clinton wasn't up to par on. But you also have to have a set of philosophies that go along with it. So, yes, the communication strategy is really important. And communicating, maybe using sports as a way to talk to somebody in Upper Wisconsin or to talk to somebody in Michigan or Pennsylvania or in North Carolina or South Florida. I mean, Florida, even though it doesn't get the same kind of connection as Texas does to football,
the Revolution Radio Network.
Live in beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. We're going to turn our attention to the world of Boston sports, and there's nobody better to talk to about Boston sports than our next guest, a longtime reporter and columnist now for the Boston Globe, has a number of books on the Red Sox curse, and of course has been on this program several times. Great to have our good friend Dan Shaughnessy of the Boston Globe with us to discuss sailing away with Chris Sale, now a member of the Red Sox. Dan, great to have you on the program. Big day in Boston sports.
Yes, it's unexpected. I mean, they made the deal for the reliever in the morning, and then we thought that would be it. And then, of course, the blockbuster just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's been pretty chaotic since then.
Certainly has been. I was watching somebody that we both like, and you've been on the show of Chris Mad Dog Russo with MLB, and when the story broke, and he, amongst a lot of the other national writers, were all saying the Red Sox won and so forth, and just a couple of people who have actually Massachusetts contacts were concerned about the prospects. But we have seen a number of people that have been prospects of the Red Sox that were supposed to develop into great pitchers. Carl Pavano comes to mind, Murphy, the outfielder, and they never developed. So maybe they will. I mean, people like Bogarts and Betts and Pedroia have, but it's a 50-50 shot. But if you got a chance, maybe the best pitcher in the American League, Dan Dombrowski took it, and the Red Sox should be in good shape to be in the World Series next year. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think when you have a 93-win team and you add that kind of a pitcher to the mix without subtracting from your big league roster, then certainly you're better in the short term, and they will be better. They should be better in the short term. And I mean, anytime you can make the Cy Young winner your third best start in your rotation, pretty strong team. So they would go in now, as I agree, prohibitive favorites going into next year based on the year they had and the pitcher that they've added. So yes, I think it's a good day here. And I understand what you're saying about the prospects. We agree on that. You never know. I mean, I was there when the Detroit Tigers traded John Smoltz for Doyle Alexander, and Doyle Alexander went 14-1 the rest of the way, and they got him in the playoffs. But you just never know what you're giving up there. And the Red Sox traded Jeff Bagwell for Larry Alexander. They got about 15 games out of him, and they won and out in the playoffs, and those don't work out so good. So you just don't know. I mean, worst case, Moncada turns into Trout, and the young kid Kopech turns into Clemens, and you say, wow, why'd you do that? But I think 6 years ago in this state, they traded Anthony Rizzo and Casey Kelly for Adrian Gonzalez. And I'm usually in favor of doing that, even though you may have a guy turn into Rizzo a few years later.
Yeah, and again, who is Casey Kelly? So, we all know about Rizzo, but so it's a 50-50 proposition. Now, Mr. Sale is kind of a cantankerous fellow, to say the least. He tore up his uniform when asked to pitch in the throwback 1970s, which actually I kind of like from a visual. I mean, these sort of cotton style uniforms. Not exactly something that I think a lot of players are excited about wearing. But he went an extra step and started tearing up the jerseys. So this could be an interesting character for you and many others to write about when he puts on his Red Sox uniform. And, of course, they have alternative jerseys, too.
Clearly a strong-minded guy. He's only 27 years old. He's, five-time All-Star, so he's got some credentials. And again, I'm only thinking about pretty much his talent and what he can bring to the rotation at this point. Obviously that's an interesting episode, and who knows where that'll end up here. And our town is not for everybody, and inflammable personalities can go either way with that, but you don't know which way it's going to go. So I'm not going to make too big a thing out of that until we get him here and see what we got and see how he performs for the Boston Red Sox.
I couldn't agree with you more. Talking with Dan Shaughnessy, the Boston Globe, here on the Jeff Santos Show. So we look still. The Red Sox could use a couple of hitters. I mean, obviously you can't replace David Ortiz, the legend, but you could replace some of his numbers. A lot of people are saying they may take it internally with Travis, but you had mentioned a couple of a month ago or so when we talked to you last about the idea of Batista. I would like to see him in a Red Sox uniform. The maybe Encarnacion, meaning apparently the Cleveland Indians are talking to him now because the 4 years that he was offered, I guess, for $80 million in Toronto is kind of off the table. Toronto, the Yankees, Houston, all potential suitors, and I think Texas now, possibly too, are all out. I mean, would it be asking too much to see if an Encarnacion or a Batista could be patrolling right field or DHing at the very least?
Yeah, I don't think they're disposed to go in there. There's the luxury tax threshold, which does concern them. I just think they feel they've spent enough. They're at that threshold. I don't think they're going to go in for a 4-year big-ticket guy. I could see a pillow contract if Joey Bats can come in under those conditions, and that's where Beltran was attractive, and those guys are gone now. So, but I don't believe Encarnacion would be part of the mix for them because it's too big